Hey guys, welcome back to Gotta Be Geek, where we go through tutorials, dev tools, and host tech talks to help you be a better engineer or developer. And in today's video, I wanted to talk about my top 10 favorite Visual Studio Code extensions. Now, I did try and keep this to a top 5, but I found it extremely difficult for me to pick just 5, so I ended up going to 10. So hopefully this doesn't seem too long, but we'll roll the intro and we'll get into number 1. Alright, number 1 on our list for Visual Studio Code extensions is going to be the GitLens extension. And and I will have a link for all of these extensions in the description below, so don't worry. But this one is probably one of my first go-to. I don't know if I would say any of the others or any kind of like order of favorite or anything. I did put GitLens at the top because I think it's a kind of a language agnostic thing that's really useful for just dealing with Git repositories. And I think if you've come from Visual Studio as an IDE in the past, you'll find that this is really nice to kind of give you a way to look at all of your branches easily and kind of manage them if you don't want to have like the GitHub desktop application. And in Visual Studio, that was one thing I would say that I really liked in Visual Studio, the full IDE, is it just made it really easy to kind of look at your branches and manage, a repository from that aspect. So if you missed any of that, I think GitLens is really powerful at giving you some of those features. Moving on to number 2 is going to be the VS Code Solution Explorer. Now this is another one if you've come from Visual Studio, the IDE in the past, and you liked the solution view, and if you saw my previous video where I did the VS Code versus Visual Studio video, which I'll have a link for in the description or for you to click on up there. But in that video, I showed a side-by-side of the kind of different layouts for Visual Studio Code versus Visual Studio. And in Visual Studio Code, where everything is always just a folder layout, in Visual Studio, you can either open something up as a solution or you can open it up in a folder view. And in that video, you could see the difference between how that's kind of rendered. So if you've kind of missed that and you like working with solutions, maybe you are working on some .NET Core project that has multiple .NET Core projects in it. So if you've missed that kind of view and ability to easily create solutions and create projects under it and have it all working together, this extension is really helpful for that, giving you that view and the ability to make those and let it manage that in a similar way that Visual Studio would. So if you missed that, then definitely check out that extension. Number 3 is going to be a bit more focused towards the web development aspect of things, and that's the Debugger for Chrome. So this is really useful if you've ever wanted to not have to open up developer tools inside Chrome, which is one of the more popular browsers for people to be doing web development and debugging with. So if you don't want to have the browser open and then open up the dev tools there to go see the code and set your breakpoints and stuff, and you've wanted to be able to debug directly in VS Code, then the Debugger for Chrome is actually what's going to make that something you can do, which is actually really nice. That just means that you can keep VS Code open, and then you can have your browser open, and you can set breakpoints right in VS Code, which is really useful. So I've always found a little bit more screen real estate gets taken away when you have to debug things in the Chrome browser versus being able to just debug it directly in VS Code. So I think that's a really helpful extension to kind of help you save some screen real estate while you're doing your development. Number 4 is going to be the C# extension. And this one is really helpful for if you're doing C# development, like .NET Core projects and stuff. This brings a process in the background called OmniSharp that does a lot of analysis and other things in loading the project. That I don't know if I would say I know everything that it brings in, but it's really helpful and provides some extra kind of stuff into VS Code to help give you some more support and tools around dealing with C# projects. So definitely check that one out if you're doing anything related to, especially with .NET Core, but pretty much anything with C#, I think. Moving on to number 5 is going to be NPM. So this one is useful in a few ways, mostly if you're, again, probably doing some form of web development, not so much if you're doing like .NET Core or MVC web development, but more if you're doing JavaScript or TypeScript development, where you're going to be using a package JSON and using Node.js. So if you've ever had a package JSON and you forgot to install a package or something, this extension is actually going to do a little squiggly line under a package. If you haven't installed it, it will let you know if there's like erroneous packages or if there's a version installed that doesn't match the version that you've indicated in your package JSON. So just kind of helpful to kind of point those things out so you don't miss them. It doesn't do anything super crazy about it, but I think it's useful, and it's something that I've always installed every time I have VS Code and I'm working on a new computer. So yeah, check it out. Moving on to number 6 is going to be Prettier Code Formatter. So this one kind of works in tandem with the fact that you need to install Prettier, the package, into your package JSON for a project where you're going to use it, and then the extension and the package kind of work together. And what this does is it, code styling, code formatting. And so if you want to have a consistent way for all of your files to look, and particularly helpful probably if you're on a team versus just someone that's working by themselves, where you don't want to have to get in the back and forth conversations around particular styling or formatting of code. You can follow some rules. Prettier is pretty inflexible, we'll say, on some of their rules. They have a few configuration options that you can change, but not a whole lot. And so this just kind of gives you a way to not have to worry about that. And you can set it where it will automatically format on save, which is really neat, so that you don't even have to worry about any style anymore, or where you break a line if it becomes too long or anything like that. You just write your code, save it, and then everything's formatted. So really useful to kind of keep things uniform and tidy across all your files. Next up is going to be number 7 is Markdown Preview Enhanced. So this extension is just a great way to be able to preview any Markdown files that you're writing. And I chose this particular one out of a few options that exist for Markdown preview previewers, because it seemed to be more focused on supporting the kind of baseline aspects of Markdown versus some of the extended features that other Markdown previewers or engines will show. So I liked that, and I think it's really useful if you're writing documentation and README files, which are kind of the forefront of GitHub repositories in today's kind of repositories. So I would say definitely check it out if you're writing a lot of README or documentation files. It's really helpful. Number 8 is going to be Todo Tree. So this one I'm pretty sure is going to be agnostic across languages. Don't quote me on that, because I honestly, for whatever reason, don't seem to do a lot of writing to-do comments on my C# projects. So I've only really used it in my web development ones. So what you can do is write a comment with to-do in it and whatever it is you're going to do. And it will not only highlight this with orange so that it stands out among your other comments a little bit easier. It gives you a way in the extensions list here, you can click on it and then get a list of all the different to-dos that you've written, which is really neat to kind of have a way to go back and find different items you've said, like, oh, like mentally, I want to go fix this thing. Maybe you wrote a method that you think can be done better later, but you were fine with like the first pass of how it worked, and you wrote a little to-do comment to say, oh, I'll go back and fix this later. And so it's really neat to be able to go back and have a single way across multiple files in a project to see the different things that you've decided to comment on that you want to go back and fix later. Number 9 is going to be auto import. And so what this does is kind of gives you some of those features that you would get from either the C# extension for VS Code, or some of the stuff that Visual Studio would just kind of do by default, where if you were typing in a class and you hadn't put a using statement for that, it would give you a way where you could hit like control period and get the quick actions, and then it would say like, oh, automatically add a using for this. So what this does is it's an auto import for packages for web development projects. So if I'm writing a web app and maybe I've used a library like Redux, and I start typing out some class name of something that I'm trying to use in my file. So as you can see here, as I do this, I'm going to type in this class, and then it will underline, hey, you don't have an import for this. And then if I click on this or hover over it, you'll see there's a little line here that says auto import from XYZ package, or in the case where you have a class in another file, it will do the same thing. And so like, oh, I found this file, and so we can just automatically import this for you here. So it's really neat. And I can't remember, sometimes you can either do like tab or enter or something like that, where you don't even have to like do anything special and click on it. You can just keep like typing and one of those will actually just autocomplete that for you and pull to using it. The only caveat to this is I have noticed that sometimes the import that it will do, especially if you already have an import from that same package or file, is rather than adding it, which usually it does right, it'll just add that import and it will say it like, do you want to add this import to your existing import? But sometimes it will just create two different imports that make things all kind of weird. So just look out for that, but it's not very often, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Number 10 on the list is actually, I'm going to cheat a little bit on number 10. So number 10 is going to be a collection of extensions. And again, I will have the link for each one below. And this is going to be like Azure Storage, Azure Static Web Apps, Azure Functions, Azure App Service. And the reason I chose to keep these all together is because these actually all end up bundling under just a Azure icon in Visual Studio Code. So while they are separate extensions, they all kind of work together and they're more focused on one thing, even though they are separate extensions. So it's really neat the way it kind of connects in. You sign into your Azure account, it will show you all the different things in there that you have. And so you can see in my list here that you can see the web app that I have for my current website. You can see the static web apps that I'm working on for the new one that I had mentioned in a previous video that I'm working on. So it's really neat, and I think that they work really well together if you're using Azure as your choice for development. There are some honorable mentions that I didn't really want to or couldn't get into in this list without it being super long, that do get a bit more language specific. I wanted to try and avoid going too heavy in the language specific stuff just because I know everyone has their own kind of flavor of what they're working on. And that said, I do have an AWS extension because I do plan on trying to do a kind of unbiased comparison between some things with AWS and Azure in the future for those of you out there, so you don't think that I'm always just pushing the Microsoft stuff, I wanted to try and do that. So if that's a video you're interested in and you have anything particular that you'd like me to compare between AWS and Azure, please let me know in the comments section below so that I can set that up on the queue of things that I need to talk about along with the other big list. And if there's a big demand for that, I can try and push that up a little bit sooner for things that I go over. But there are some kind of honorable mentions for some other language specific ones like Vetur for Vue.js. There's, what was it? TSLint. There's a few different variations of those that you can use for different. There's like TSLint for Vue, then there's just the regular TSLint one, but that actually, the latest TSLint extension requires a package that you also need to use. So if you're trying to lint, and if you don't know what linting is, but linting is fixing, again, it's kind of like a code formatting, but a little bit different, fixing kind of rules to, there's a lot of rules you can apply for linters to go through and fix various things, whether it be casing in files or how many spaces in between parentheses on different things. And I have just got a hair on my nose that will not go away. It's the dogs. I vacuumed today and it's just everywhere. It doesn't matter. Every week, vacuum, but it's always hair. You've seen it in my previous videos. I think in the last one there was like a hair. There's probably hair right here. Yep, you can see. It just doesn't. It's never ending. It's a husky and an Australian Shepherd. For any of you that probably haven't seen any pictures, I don't know if I've put them in any of the videos or if they've seen them or if you've caught them, but they create a lot of hair. So that's why you will probably always see some sort of hair on me in these videos. It's annoying and it just never stops. Anyway, so that was, I think those were I could probably go into a few others. There's some for Rust, which I think I mentioned in a previous video, is it's kind of gives you support for Rust. There's Go. There's one for Deno, which I did on the last video, which if you haven't watched, I'll have a link for it in the top there that you can click on. But there's a special extension to have support for the way Deno does like their imports and a few other things. And this, if you have the Deno extension, you also have to disable it specifically in projects where you're using Node.js. So that's something to look out for. And then what's the import cost was another kind of honorable mention one that I didn't want to include in the main list. But if you have a need to, if you're really concerned about the size of the different packages that you're using import cost is really useful. It tells you how big each package is. And so if you're developing something where size is really, really important, then that kind of helps you out, which is kind of neat. So I think that covers most of them. If you're interested in hearing any more, I can maybe generate a full list of the extensions that I use if anybody's interested, but I'll keep all the ones, including the honorable mentions, in the description below. I think that's going to be it for me. Like this video if you thought it was helpful, if you liked any of the extensions, if there's extensions I didn't mention that you think are incredibly helpful that I should have brought up, or you're wondering why I didn't bring it up, please put it in the comment section below so that other people can see it, so that I can see it. I'd love to hear what comments or what extensions you use in the comments section below. And if you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. There's a lot of you out there watching these videos that aren't subscribing. So feel free to comment. Let me know what video would you like to see that might get you to subscribe. What's missing in this channel that you think would help you or a friend? Let me know, and I will see you guys in the next one.